Hi, Ben, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
I just want to welcome everyone back to Pride in the Living Room, Jewmos edition. Quick reminder, Pride in the Living Room was founded by the Israeli LGBT task force, Agudah, in memory of the 2009 Tel Aviv Gay Center shooting and the Jerusalem Pride Parade stabbing in 2015. And Agudah founded this project to offer a stage and a voice to LGBT Jews from around the world to share their stories, to encourage empathy and community. So, all of that said, it is my pleasure to welcome Ben to the stage to share with us his incredible Scottish accent and his incredible story. Ben, over to you.
Thank you very much. My name is Ben Freeman. I'm 33 years old. I'm from Scotland, as Jared said, but I'm currently living in Hong Kong. I'm an educator and an author. I teach at a progressive, inclusive international school in Hong Kong, which is really amazing because I get to teach really fascinating subjects like activism through art, representation of women in pop culture, gender and sexuality. And last year I taught a 3-month class on the Holocaust, which is a great privilege to be able to teach a subject like that for that long. I've got my first book coming out in January. It's actually about Jewish pride. It's called Jewish Pride, Rebuilding a People. And it's really using my experience as a gay man and reflecting on how important pride is to me and really the wider LGBTQ community, and seeing how that concept can be applied to the Jewish community, how we can build a Jewish pride movement. So that is coming out in January. I'm an activist, I guess, although I prefer to refer to myself as an educator and author because I feel like education is the first form of activism. I'm currently running webinars that focus on a number of different topics. The first was progressive anti-Semitism, an introduction to progressive anti-Semitism. The second is launching in September, and it's going to be an introduction to the Israel-Palestine conflict. And I really feel that education is vital, and we have to come together as a community to understand ourselves more, understand our identities, our stories, our histories, which is why I'm a teacher. I believe that education is paramount, and especially in activism. If we want to make the world a better place, if we want individuals to look into themselves, to understand themselves better, the world better, the first step of that has to be education. I traditionally, I was a Holocaust educator. That was kind of my main job. I was a professional Holocaust educator. I founded a nonprofit in 2012 that worked with schools to combat prejudice with specific reference to the Holocaust. It was founded after I made a journey to Eastern Europe. I'd been very privileged to be able to travel to Eastern Europe a number of times, and I decided to go back to learn more. And on that trip, along with a friend, we filmed our experience and we created a nonprofit that worked with schools. And a huge amount of the work that we did, as I said, obviously focused on the Holocaust, but also focused on LGBTQ visibility. And it was a great honor to do that. It has been a great honor and a great privilege to be an openly gay Jewish educator and activist, which means that when I speak to Jewish audiences or non-Jewish audiences about anti-Semitism or the Holocaust, for example, just by being openly gay, I'm also drawing attention to the LGBTQ plus community and issues which pertain to us specifically. Any questions?
I'm happy to step in. Well, thank you, Ben, for giving us an overview of your work. Um, I think it's really incredible to hear what you're up to. You know, you're
Thank you.
a Holocaust educator. You have written a book about the Jewish pride. movement, which is so exciting. Um, I'm interested. I have a few different questions that have already popped up in my mind. Um, maybe we'll start here. So you are a Holocaust educator. I'm interested to know, you are Jewish, you're also gay. Would you use the term gay to describe yourself?
Yeah.
Yep. So you're Jewish, you're gay. Um, how do you relate to the Holocaust as a Jew and as a gay man?
That's a really good question. I think, honestly, I primarily relate to it as a Jew. My LGBTQ identity was formed later. You know, I came out when I was 19, whereas I always knew that I was Jewish. I was brought up in a Jewish home. I went to synagogue. My community was Jewish. So I always felt connected to that before I even began considering what my sexual identity may be. So I definitely primarily relate to the Holocaust as a Jew. And I feel that the LGBTQ story from that period is actually very different. So it's a different thing to relate to. I relate also, I would say that I relate to the Holocaust, and I also relate to the persecution of LGBTQ people. I see them as two separate things because the policies that targeted the two groups were different, the experiences were different, the experiences following the end of the war were different. And yes, there was a little bit of crossover for a period in the camps, but the stories are largely very different. And have their own histories. So for me, I relate to them both, and I relate to them as individual experiences. I prefer not to lump them together, actually. I would define the Holocaust as a Jewish experience, and I define the persecution of LGBTQ people as a specific experience, and then the persecution of the Roma as a specific experience. But it is interesting because often when people find out I'm both gay and Jewish, one of the first things they say is, wow, the Nazis would have hated you. And I think they mean it as a joke, but it isn't funny because it's a reminder that, yeah, these two identities, these two communities that I belong to and cannot leave. I cannot change my Jewishness, nor can I change my gayness. And I wouldn't want to. But these two identities that I cannot change were the reasons that people were murdered and treated so horrendously. So yeah, I do relate to them, but I relate to them as different experiences.
Mm. Uh, so can you take us all the way back to the beginning uh, to give us a little bit more context into who Ben is and
Okay.
how you ended up doing the incredible work you're doing? So take us all the way back. Can you talk me through the moments of discovery, of self-identification, of making peace with every piece of yourself?
Mm,
Can you talk through some of those stories?
absolutely. I was born in Glasgow, Scotland in 1987. So I'm a baby of the 80s, which when you work with teenagers makes you feel very old. And I grew up in a very Jewish home, a very, very Jewish home. My family, we were not necessarily that observant, but there was such a Jewish environment. We had Friday night dinner together every Shabbat. I didn't go out on a Friday night without my family until I was 21, I believe was the first time. I kept kosher. I was involved in the Jewish community. I was involved in Jewish youth movements. My friends were Jewish. So that part of my identity was very easy. I never really I experienced anti-Semitism at school and then at university. And it was really at university that I began to feel shame about my Jewishness. And I also at the time worked for a Jewish organization, a Scottish organization called it's a British organization, but I worked for the Scottish branch, the UJIA. But during that time, it's interesting because I had such a secure, for the most part, secure Jewish identity. But at that time, I was really discovering my gay identity. And I guess I always knew that I was gay, but I didn't really consider it before puberty. And then after puberty, I very much knew. but it was not something I could admit. It wasn't something I was comfortable with at all. It took me a really long time to be comfortable with it. And I think that's partly because of a lack of representation. There was no Jewish representation in Britain at the time, but I had a community, I had a family around me, you know, reflecting myself back. However, being a gay kid surrounded by heterosexuals at a time when we were much further back than we are now. You know, when I was at primary school, there was a law in Britain that forbade the discussing of homosexuality. It was called Section 28, I believe it was called. And so I grew up in a very different time, and there was no representation, and I thought that there was something wrong with me. I thought that I was broken and that I was not going to be able to have a happy life because I was never shown that I could. So I had to do a huge amount of work to accept myself. And there were moments where I didn't. I mean, a lot of time that I didn't. But I guess at some point I figured out that I had no choice. It was either it was going to kill me, or I was going to kind of thrive. And I chose to thrive because I love being part of the LGBTQ community. I think it's incredibly special. I think what we've contributed to the world is amazing, despite the experiences we've had, despite the homophobia that we are subjected to. But yeah, it was a really long process. I mean, most of my teens, I had very poor mental health. Even in my 20s, I did. And I think that's something that people are not necessarily aware of when you come out. Coming out is represented on TV and in Hollywood as like the end of the journey, and then you go forward as a full, happy, comfortable LGBTQ person. And that's not necessarily the case. It's the beginning of a journey, actually. And you have to come out constantly. Whenever you tell someone about your partner and you use partner, people assume, or when I use male pronouns for my partner because he identifies as male, that is, you're coming out constantly. Although I have to say that now my LGBTQ identity is for the most part very accepted, whereas my Jewish is not. And I experience more anti-Semitism now than I do homophobia. And I also experience, I think, more anti-Semitism from the LGBTQ community than I do. So anti-Semitism from the LGBTQ community than I do homophobia from the Jewish community. So I think that is kind of interesting that a lot of people don't expect that. But yeah, it was a really long journey. It was a journey that I don't think it's a journey that ever ends. I think that we're constantly working on it and, reinforcing our confidence, reinforcing our pride, reinforcing our belief in our identities and our pride in our identities. It's active work.
It's really fascinating what you said about experiencing more anti-Semitism in the LGBT spaces that you inhabit than homophobia, LGBT phobia, Jewish spaces. It's actually a common thread that I've experienced in my talks, in my interviews. I was going to ask you this question, and maybe it'll open up a bit more of this conversation topic. What was your experience coming out as gay in Jewish spaces and coming out as Jewish in LGBT spaces?
I guess I had an interesting experience because when I came out, I was working for the Jewish community and I was very well respected. I was running community events. I was the Scottish youth worker. There's not a very big community, so there was only one of me. So people, I don't know what they said about me behind my back, but to me, I never had any issues. People, I think I offered representation to people, whereas I lacked representation in my experience growing up. By being a proud, active Jew who came out, I think that showed the Jewish community that these two identities are not mutually exclusive. You can actually be a very proud Jew who works hard for the Jewish community and for the Jewish people, whilst also being a member of the LGBTQ community. I think that I offered people a glimpse into that reality, probably for the first time. And I was, obviously gay. I never hid it. But, you know, the rabbis, the Orthodox rabbis who I had to deal with on a daily basis were always very respectful. We had very good relationships. But in a way, I was privileged because I had a position of power. I had a role in the community, right? I was not a kid, although I was very young, I was not a kid, you know, unknown to the community and trying to be accepted. I was established when I came out already, and they'd known me for a really long time. So I think that certainly helped. And yeah, I never really found homophobia in Jewish spaces, or LGBTQ phobia in Jewish spaces. I know it exists. I'm not saying for a second it doesn't exist. It absolutely does. But doesn't exist as overtly in the circles that I run in. I don't really mix with ultra-Orthodox Jews. You know, even the rabbis I was working with in Glasgow, they were Orthodox, but they weren't, you know, the Satmar, for example. So I was not haven't had very much contact with homophobic or LGBTQ phobic Jews. And it's really interesting. You referenced the Pride stabbing at the beginning of this talk. I was in Israel for that. I was in Israel 10 years previously when he did it originally. And I was at Pride in Jerusalem, and they handed me flyers that said homosexuality is a psychological illness. So excuse me, I'm very aware that it does exist in the Jewish community. I've not had a huge amount of interaction with it. And being Jewish in LGBTQ spaces has always been a problem. My first boyfriend was anti-Semitic. And it's always been something I've had to contend with, because I've always been a proud Jew. I've always been a Zionist. I am an unapologetic Zionist. I'm an unapologetic Jew, and I will not diminish that part of my identity to be accepted by anyone, LGBTQ or whatever. So that has caused problems. And in all honesty, I don't have an enormously wide LGBTQ circle of friends. The LGBTQ friends that I have, for the most part, I met through either dating or I dated their friend. So those friendships emerged kind of organically, and we bonded over many things, common interests, other than just being LGBTQ. So the Jewishness was not such an issue with them, or isn't an issue with them, I should say. But absolutely, it is a huge issue. I mean, for example, Palestine being framed as an LGBTQ issue, which was happening when I was coming out. I mean, these ideas are not new, and it's absurd. And it's really disappointing because I, as I said, had to do a lot of work internally to feel pride in my LGBTQ identity and marry my two identities. But what we're seeing now is there are specifically LGBTQ people who want to cause a separation, who want to cause a chasm between my two identities and ask me to choose. And I will not choose. I cannot choose.
You flirted with the word activism earlier, although you prefer to self-describe as an educator.
Yeah.
You have, hearing your story, it seems like you actively seek roles where you have a position of power or influence. From what you just said, it says to me that you said yourself, you're a proud Zionist. You become passionately invested in issues that are important to you. I'm going to use the word activist because I think it's a good descriptor. Why do you think that activism is a concept that is part of your life? What is it about activism that's important to you?
That's a really good question. In some ways, I think I've been called to it. And I don't know if I really feel comfortable even using that kind of descriptor myself. But yeah, in some ways, I think I've been called to it. I am, as you said at the beginning, a bit of an extrovert. I'm not fully an extrovert. I do need time privately to restore myself. My partner, for example, is an extrovert and he gets energy from being with people. I don't really. But I am an extrovert, and I have beliefs. I have values that I have considered, that I have thought through, and that I'm passionate about. And I guess as a teacher, as an educator, I mean, I've only been a teacher for a few years, but I've been an educator for a really long time. And every day you stand up and teach, you're being an activist about something, right? Whether it's directly related to the subject you're discussing or not. And I'm aware of that power. I guess I'm aware of the influence I've been able to have, and my voice, the power of my voice, and the fact that I have been a role model. And I feel comfortable with that. Not necessarily all the time, and definitely it's scary. You know, watching your profile get bigger and bigger online can be quite frightening and overwhelming. But in general, I feel comfortable expressing my opinions. I feel comfortable being a role model. And I guess I feel comfortable leading. And I think that is because of my Jewish upbringing. I mean, I was literally trained to be a leader. I did hadracha. So I was a leader in the Jewish community. I wrote programs. I ran not lesson plans, but I guess activities. So I've been a leader for over half of my life in some capacity, not necessarily like, a huge leader, but I was leading. I led summer tours of Israel. I led summer camps. So I guess it's just been a part of my experience. And the reason I feel so comfortable discussing my opinions and my values is because I try very hard not to talk about things I don't know about. Because I believe in expertise, I believe in experience, I believe in listening to people who kind of know what they're talking about, questioning, obviously. Like I always say to my students, question me if you don't agree, but you've got to come with something, you've got to back it up. You can't just disagree for the sake of disagreeing. Why are you disagreeing? What is the basis for your argument? And I really believe in that. And because I have made it my life's mission, I guess, to learn as much as possible about anti-Semitism, about the Holocaust, about these other issues, I feel comfortable standing up and discussing it. And I'm passionate about it. I believe in it. I think it's that kind of combination. I don't know, it's really interesting. It's a really interesting question about why I think that there's definitely times where I think, why would people listen to me? Why should they listen to me? But I guess the reality is they don't have to. People don't have to listen to me if they don't like what I say. So they can unfollow me, they can block me, whatever they want. But I have a truth that I feel it's important to share and to speak.
You've spoken about some of the LGBT phobia you faced, but also a lot of the anti-Semitism that you faced in your journey. I'm wondering if you could maybe talk through a moment in particular that stands out to you, or if not, when you are faced with those conversations, what gives you strength in those moments?
I will say, I think what gives me strength is, it's that song, right? I don't know. I am who I am. I am who I am from La Cage aux Folles. Like, I am who I am. I can't change it. We know that conversion therapy is a pseudoscience and it's incredibly harmful. It doesn't work and it's deeply damaging. We cannot change our identities, and nor do I want to. I don't know. I have pride. I think pride is what gives me strength. I love being Jewish and I love being gay, and I wouldn't change it. If someone had said to me maybe 15 years ago, oh, would you be a heterosexual? I probably would have said yes. I was really struggling at that time. But now, as a 33-year-old, no way. I love my life. I love my partner. I love the life that we're making. I love the community. And yes, there are issues with it, specifically regarding anti-Semitism, but, it's an incredible community to be a part of, because we have contributed so much and we've achieved so much in the face of such adversity. And it's the same with the Jewish community, so it's just pride. I love it. I don't want to, I reject it. I reject their attempt to shame me. And that doesn't mean if someone is anti-Semitic to me that it doesn't sting, it doesn't hurt me. Of course it does. I'm not saying that for a second, but my kind of ability to get back up is because of pride. I'm like, well, you're a racist or you're a homophobe. And that's your problem, not mine. And my life is not going to be made any less wonderful because you have issues.
So you said you have a partner. Can I ask if he's Jewish?
He's not Jewish, no.
I'm intrigued. I've had many conversations with people who are dating Jewish men, non-Jewish men, Jewish women, non-Jewish women.
Mm.
Um, how does Judaism feed into the life that you're building together?
I mean, that's a great question, and I'm incredibly lucky. As I said, that my first boyfriend was an anti-Semite. Um, I would say quite an aggressive one, actually. But I'm very lucky that my current partner is not at all. He is incredibly supportive of my work. He has learned a huge amount through me and our relationship, and he's open. And I think that I am Jewish. That is my identity. It's my primary identity, actually. So it plays into the life we plan together just in that this is going to be my work. He is aware that this is my work. I've just written a book about Jewish pride that I will probably write more, and they will probably all be connected to my Jewishness. And he's incredibly supportive. He's not Jewish. We have no plans or for him to convert. It's not even a conversation. I don't think it's important. He has his own identity, and his identity is not any less important than mine. So we do the holidays, we do Rosh Hashanah, we do Hanukkah, we do Christmas. And it's, you know, I would never celebrate Christmas if it wasn't for him, but it's important to share, and it's important to fuse your identities together. And it would be very easy to say, well, you know, being Jewish is the minority, so therefore I want to do the Jewish stuff and not the Christian stuff. Whereas actually that's not very fair. You have to kind of come to the conversations as equals and be respectful. And yeah, I mean, he was raised as a Christian, so we've had some difficult conversations about Christianity and Judaism and the history, absolutely. But I think the most important thing is to try and be open to the other's perspective and emotional attachment. You know, it's if I was glib about the role of Christianity and anti-Semitism, it would do the subject disservice, but also it would be insulting to him, because that's his identity, and it's about understanding his identity is separate to the history, for example.
You were saying that when you were younger, you were going through a time of transition, of self-discovery, of sussing out your gayness and how that fits into the larger framework of Judaism. So in those moments, what was it about Judaism that made you want to hold on or to fall back in love with Judaism?
I guess I wouldn't say it was Judaism. I would say it was my Jewishness. My perspective on our identity, or my identity, is that we're not just a religion, we're an ethno-religion, and we're connected by so much more than religion. We're connected by genetics in some cases, culture, tradition, language, history, you know. So for me, it's not a question of I am Jewish. It's not about a belief. It's not about belief system. It's not about leaving Judaism or following Judaism or not. I am a Jew. I am Jewish. There's nothing I can do about that. So it was about finding my own relationship with it. And actually, this is how I do it. You know, I took part recently in a talk about LGBTQ identities and religion, and I had to say, listen, my identity is not really of a religion. So that makes it a lot easier, actually, because I don't need to then deal with Leviticus that says man shall not lie with a man, even though it's a total mistranslation what everyone bangs on about. But I don't even need to deal with it, because it's not my way to identify. It's not my identity. My identity is as a Jew. It's not as a kind of follower of Judaism. And yes, they're connected, obviously. But in my book, I primarily talk about Jewishness, not Judaism. So I never really was faced with this struggle of leaving, of coming back, of feeling close. I was like, well, this is who I am. It's like another thing of, well, this is just who I am, and I can't change it.
really interesting to hear the distinction you make between Judaism and Jewishness.
Mm,
I think a lot of the points that you've raised will resonate with many of our Pride in the Living Room viewers and participants. Uh, well, particularly in helping to offer a language that people can use
mm,
to suss out those distinctions. So
mm.
thank you so much for sharing that, Ben.
Of course. Yeah, I think it's really important that we understand who we are. And actually, I'm a historian primarily, and historically, it is inaccurate and ahistorical to solely identify Jews as followers of a religion. It's just not accurate. And there are reasons why that became the primary focus of our identity. But yeah, so it was quite interesting speaking to Muslim LGBTQ people or Christian LGBTQ people who they identify with the religion. So yes, it's a big problem for them when they discuss homophobia in their specific religions. Whereas, while there may be Jews who disagree, while there are Jews who disagree with LGBTQ people and do not respect us, that doesn't change my Jewishness. My Jewishness is just as valid as theirs, even if we express it differently. And that's kind of historical, so I think it is we are very lucky actually as LGBTQ Jews to have this root to our identity and our people without having I spoke to these people in this webinar that I took part in, and it was very difficult for them. And it wasn't something I ever experienced myself.
You mentioned the book that you've written and your intention to write more books into the future. Please plug your book. Tell us what led you um, to writing a book, why this topic. If you have a version, show it to the camera.
I don't yet. It will be out in January, so it's still with the copy editor. It should be done in a week. But when I was young, growing up in Britain, we were taught, as Jews, we were taught, keep your head down, don't say anything, just get on with things. And as you kind of identified within about 3 seconds of meeting me, that is just not my style. I am like mouthy, I'm loud, or I can be mouthy, loud, obnoxious, especially if it's something I believe in. So I could never be quiet. And when I experienced anti-Semitism at university, which I did a huge amount, I went to Glasgow University, which was very left-wing, I could either be quiet or I could fight. And I fought every day for 4 years. And I found that while I understood why Jewish people said, keep your head down, be quiet, I didn't agree with it. And I do not think it is an appropriate communal policy when we're seeing such a rise in anti-Semitism. And I saw the term Zionism be co-opted and appropriated and be turned into something that it wasn't. And I saw Jews not feeling able to reclaim it. So I reflected on my own journey, my own identity. As I said, I had a lot of trauma, a lot of difficulty being an LGBTQ person, and I worked very hard to feel pride. And we celebrate Pride once a year, and it's a part of our, I think, our identities, pride. I mean, we as LGBTQ people discuss it constantly. And that's not to say our community is perfect. Obviously, we have inter-communal issues. But that experience of pride, coupled with what I saw in the Jewish community, I saw people crying out to be given permission to feel proud, to be told, yeah, listen, we have a lot to be proud of. Go ahead. Great. Love it. Reject the shame. Reject their perception. I say the non-Jewish world's perception of us. Because anti-Semitism is not about Jewish people. It's about concepts of Jewish people. It's about non-Jewish perceptions of Jewish people that have very little bearing in our reality, our diversity. So I kind of, knew I wanted to write something, and I wrote an article about reclaiming Zionism. And one of my friends, who's a professor in Hong Kong, said, "Oh, you should turn it into a book." And I was like, all right, okay, very good, sure. But I decided to. There's a great British academic called David Hirsch, who is kind of the expert on left-wing anti-Semitism, and I'm lucky to know him. And he came to Hong Kong. I coordinated, and during that trip, we got talking, and I first of all said, "Oh, I want to write this, and I'd like you to help me." And him living in the UK and me living in Hong Kong, that became too difficult, but it just spurred me on. So I started writing on October 7th of last year. I finished it. I finished the first draft, I think by the end of May. And over the summer that's just been, I worked with a structural editor to kind of tighten the arguments, because I'm a vomit writer. I just write. So then you have to like take sections out, you have to tighten it. And now it's gone to the copy editor. And I was very lucky. I started writing it and I didn't have a book deal. And because of my following on Twitter, I was very lucky to be signed by a brand new publishing house called No Pazuran Media, who specialize specifically in combating left-wing anti-Semitism, because this really does speak to progressives. And it's the reason why anti-Semitism stings so much. If people are homophobic to me, I generally can assume that they're very conservative. And that's actually expected. Maybe that's a generalization, but that's what it is. When the left are anti-Semitic, even though I expect it, it's still hurtful because they're the one women, pro-LGBTQ. So that's why the book is specifically aimed at them. And I want to give people permission to feel pride. I want to give them an opportunity to consider their own identities and to feel able to reject the non-Jewish world's perception of what it means to be a Jew. And for us as a people to explore our history, our experiences, our values, and address our own issues, which we have many of. And it's not, Jewish pride is not about saying we're perfect, it's far from it. It's about saying that we need to turn inwards and work on ourselves. Because I really firmly believe that anti-Semitism is not a Jewish problem. It is a non-Jewish problem that impacts us. And that means we're not really able to make a huge amount of inroad into combating it. But we have a lot of work to do in ourselves. It's collective and individual self-esteem.
I think you became a little bit laggy in a few
Sorry.
spots, but we caught all your audio, so
Great.
that's all good. I didn't want to interrupt you. Yeah, it sounds like a really beautiful project.
Yeah, I'm very proud of it. It's really it's many things. And one, it's in some ways a self-help book. It's in some ways a history lesson. It's in some ways a psychological study. And it's not academic. I decided not to write an academic book because Jewish pride is for everyone. And academia actually can be quite elitist. You know, I'm fairly familiar with this work, and when I'm reading certain books, still have to read the same sentence 2 or 3 times to really understand what it's saying. And I never wanted to create a book that would alienate people. I wanted to create a book that everyone could access. And it's through storytelling. I want to tell Jewish stories. So I've interviewed 7 Jewish people from around the world. A Jew who lives in Australia actually as well, because the Southern Hemisphere is very rarely represented in Jewish stories. And it was really important for me to discuss, when I say self-help book, the last chapter is really kind of like a blueprint for Jewish pride. And some of the things that I say are, you know, Jewish diversity is incredible, but also one of the things we have to do to build a Jewish pride movement is to work towards solving our issues with, our issues between the Jewish sub-ethnic groups, so Ashkenazi, Mizrahi, Sephardic, Bet Israeli, LGBTQ phobia, anti-Black racism, misogyny, all those exist in our community. But I believe that we can do better, and I believe that we can work towards solving them. So that is what it's about. It's like a love letter to the Jewish community, because I feel that we are desperate for it. People are desperate to be given permission to be proud. And, you know, as I said, I'm running these webinars, and the end couple of slides are about Jewish pride and about Jewish identity. And I have people writing to me afterwards and saying, thank you. I'm now starting the process of kind of dealing with my internalized anti-Semitism, or I now feel proud to say I'm a Zionist, or proud to say I'm a Jew. Because you know, we can talk about these issues in a really big way. We can talk about Jewish pride and our people and our nation. But at the end of the day, we're all just individuals. And every individual has the right to feel comfortable in who they are and feel supported and feel accepted. So that's why I say collective and individual self-esteem.
I have one more question, if that's okay.
Please.
I'd like to take us all the way back to the very beginning. So you're just discovering that there's something a little bit different about you. You're young, the whole world is ahead of you, you know, and there's a path yet to be taken. I'm just wondering, you're 33 now, you've gained so much wisdom, you're an educator, you're a book writer, you are an activist. With everything that you've gained, if you had a chance to speak to that Ben, what would you say?
Wow. This is like RuPaul's Drag Race. That's what she always does at the end. She holds a picture up of them when they were kids. I think I would say, don't be ashamed. Just don't be ashamed. I was so ashamed of who I was. I was so ashamed of being LGBTQ, of being gay. And I think I would say, don't be ashamed, because there's nothing to be ashamed of. And I think being young and having anyone tell me that would have made a huge difference, because as I said, it was a very different time. There was no representation. So I would just say, don't be ashamed and you're fine.
Thank you so much, Ben, for spending time with us at Pride in the Living Room.
Of course.
I think, as I said before, I think your story has messages that a lot of people can relate to, elements of your story. And then at the same time, your work as an educator really shines through, because you explain issues really clearly. And I think you'll put a nugget into our listeners' minds, and maybe they'll be inspired to research more on topics. And definitely they'll check out your book in January, I'm sure.
Good. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Before we head off, do you have any final words?
I think that currently LGBTQ Jews are experiencing a very specific and difficult moment in our history as a community within a community. And I think that it's really important to tell LGBTQ Jews that being asked to diminish a part of you isn't acceptable. That is not acceptance. If someone says to you, okay, so if you just do this, then you'll be accepted, that's not acceptance. All of you has to be accepted. Your Jewish side, your LGBTQ side has to be accepted, and we should be highly suspicious of anyone that says otherwise. And I would say there are so many LGBTQ Jews who have found a way to be proudly LGBTQ and proudly Jewish, and it's entirely possible. So don't allow, whether you're in a Jewish environment that is LGBTQ phobic or you're in a LGBTQ environment that is anti-Semitic, don't allow their bigotry to shame who you are, because you are who you are meant to be. You're perfect, and you shouldn't change yourself for anyone. That's what I would say.
Thank you again, Ben. Here's to sharing our story in this moment and many more moments in the future.
Bye.